Welcome to the Game Before the Money podcast, celebrating pro and college football history. This episode, an amazing stat about the 2025 Green Bay Packers defense. Hi everybody, I'm Michael Jackson. Thank you. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible, but there is a stat I want to bring to your attention. After 9 games, the 2025 Packers defense has not given up a touchdown in the first quarter all year. Total, that defense has only given up 6 points in the first quarter through 9 games. Wow. Has this happened before? Let's find out. It's truly unbelievable. We're in mid-November and the Packers have only given up 6 points total in the first quarter. The record is 5-3-1. Okay? We're going to compare this stat against some of the greatest defenses and teams of all time, like the Steel Curtain Steelers, 72 Dolphins, 2007 Patriots, and of course the 85 Bears defense. And at the end, I'm going to compare them to whom I consider to have the most unbelievable statistics defensively all time in terms of points given up. Do you have any guesses who that might be? Now remember, we're going into week 10 and the Packers still haven't given up a first quarter touchdown. That's insane, especially in this era. Micah Parsons, of course, a big part of that. But let's look at this stat historically. The 2025 Packers stat first came to my attention a few weeks ago. I think it was on a CBS broadcast. Of course, could have been Fox. It's one of the two. It was a Sunday afternoon game. And they brought up that the Packers were on a record pace for first quarter points given up. And the last comparable team was the 1998 Broncos. So let's look at the 1998 Broncos, who won the Super Bowl over the Falcons in Elway's last season. Dan Neal was the starting guard on that team. You can hear him on several episodes of the Game Before the Money podcast, including episode 67. Okay, that 98 Broncos team gave up a touchdown in week 2 against the Cowboys. That was 7 points. The next first quarter points that the 98 Broncos gave up was a field goal against the Jaguars in week 8. And he gave up a field goal to the Bengals in week 9. So that was 13 total points after 9 games in the first quarter that defense gave up. And the Broncos were 9-0 at that time. So the Packers, only 6 points given up after 9 games. And, the Broncos defense had Steve Atwater on it. He was fantastic. Also, Neil Smith. I got to give a shout out to Neil Smith. He kind of shifted the tide on that Broncos defense in that era. I don't know if they win Super Bowls without Neil Smith on that team. People talk about Terrell Davis a lot, but Neil Smith kind of a little bit forgotten for whatever reason. I'm sure Chiefs fans remember Neil Smith. He was with Kansas City much of his career. All right, so let's look at some other great defenses and their statistics. I mean, I can't believe we're comparing them with the 2025 Packers, but here we go. I mean, this stat is so insane. The 85 Bears, okay, how do the 2025 Packers in the first quarter compare with the 85 Bears in the first quarter? Well, the 85 Bears gave up 14 points in week 1 in the first quarter against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had Steve DeBerg at quarterback. Now, there's a name out of the past. The 85 Bears didn't necessarily shut out teams in the first quarter. They only had 2 shutouts overall in the regular season, back-to-back shutouts against the Cowboys in Atlanta. And I'm talking about full game shutouts in that. that 85 Bears defense, a lot of their fame comes from the 15-1 record, and also the fact that they have back-to-back shutouts in the playoffs and only gave up 10 total points in the playoffs. Now, I ain't here to start no trouble, okay? Some of you will get that reference. But the 86 Bears also had a great defense. And they only gave up 6 first-quarter points in their first 7 games. Okay, that's comparable to the Packers. The Browns recovered a fumble in the end zone for a touchdown in week 1, but that doesn't count against the defense. The 86 Bears went 14-2. Okay, that's only one more loss than that 15-1 team, and they gave up fewer points than the 85 Bears. How many of you knew that? I see a few hands raised. I know we got some real knowledgeable fans listening out there. The 86 Bears lost in the first round of the playoffs to Washington, who ended up losing to the Giants in the NFC Championship game. That was a golden era for the NFC back then. Okay, so now the 85 Bears, 86 Bears, especially the 85 Bears, probably the most famous Bears defense and one of the most famous NFL defenses of all time. But the 63 Bears, okay, now I'm talking to you Bears fans, all right? I'm not a Bears fan, but, I respect any great team in history. The 63 Bears, they only gave up 3 first-quarter points in their first 5 games. And then they gave up 13 against the 49ers in week 6. So while that's 16 first-quarter points over 6 weeks, that was it for first-quarter points for the 1963 Bears until Minnesota got a field goal in week 12. Okay? So the 63 Bears, who ended up winning the NFL championship game over Y.A. Tittle and the Giants, a tremendous defense, and actually gave up fewer points per game than the 85 Bears and the 86 Bears. So in some ways, I saved the best for last for Bears defenses. Although I'm going to have one more later in the show. I think Bears fans might know what team that might be. But we're going to move on to the Steel Curtain, okay? I know Steelers fans are waiting to hear. How does the Steel Curtain compare to this year's Packers? Did I really just say that? My goodness. But we're just talking about one stat here. First quarter points given up. Okay, the Packers have only given up 6 points in the first 9 weeks in the first quarter. This still blows my mind. So let's look at the 1974 Steelers first, the team that held Minnesota to 6 points in the Super Bowl. And 0 first half points, I believe. I think the score was 2-0 at the end of the first half. Don't quote me on that, even though, this is the podcast, so I'm going to get quoted anyway. But anyway, so that 74 Steelers team gave up 21 first quarter points to the Broncos in week 2. And that was uncharacteristic for that team. But of course, remember, this is Jack Lambert's rookie year, Donnie Shell's rookie year. And you can hear about that amazing 1974 Steelers draft in episode 47 of The Game Before the Money. And Donnie Shell, of course, a free agent signing that year as a rookie. So the 74 Steelers really aren't the best comparison for the Steelers. So let's talk 1976, a year that Steelers fans will often say is their best team, even though they lost the AFC Championship game that year to the Raiders. And yes, of course, injuries might have had something to do with that. But the Super Bowl champion Raiders were pretty awesome that year also. In fact, the Raiders during that era were incredible. But the point is, this might have been the Steelers' best overall defense in those dynasty years. And my good friend Glenn, who's a Cowboys fan, reminded me to group the 76 Steelers into this episode. And he's a Cowboys fan, so there you go. The Steelers had 3 shutouts in a row that season. Full game shutouts. Week 7, Week 8, Week 9. Surprisingly, they were 2-4 going into Week 7, however. How are they in first quarter points till then? Well, they gave up 6 to New England in Week 3 on 2 field goals. And another field goal to the Browns in Week 5. And another field goal to the Bengals in Week 6. So that's 12 total points after 10 weeks. And then we include those 3 straight shutout games. That's still twice as many points as the Packers had given up in their first 9 games. But remember, the Steelers were still at 12 points in Week 9 and carried that. So that's still how crazy this Packers stat is for this year. Okay? Now, I'm also going to talk about the 1978 Steelers because that's the best Steeler team that I can personally remember. This 1978 Steelers team, get ready, as the Temptations would say. Okay? I know the 76 Steelers have kind of the reputation, but the 78 Steelers, like I said, get ready. Didn't give up any first quarter points in their first 8 games. Nothing. 0. They gave up a field goal to Kansas City in Week 9. They gave up another field goal to the Bengals in Week 12. And that was it. Okay? 6 total points in the first quarter during the entire regular season for the 1978 Steelers. No touchdowns. Okay? That blows my mind. Okay? And don't give me any of this different era kind of thing. You know, the Mel Blount rule, the so-called Mel Blount rule, you know, that started in 1978, the same season. So the 78 Steelers, they only had 3 games in which they gave up more than 17 points. Truly one of the greatest defenses and truly one of the greatest teams of all time. And again, I'm not a Steelers fan. So the 14-2 regular season record for the 78 Steelers defeated the Cowboys in Super Bowl 13. Still one of the best Super Bowls that I've ever watched. And one of the first Super Bowls that I remember. But that 78 Steelers team, okay, no first quarter touchdowns the whole year. I don't know if that's ever happened before. Okay? There might be a team coming up later in this podcast that did that. We'll have to find out. Okay? So next I looked at was the 72 Dolphins that went undefeated. And, you know, are we really comparing the 2025 Packers to the 72 Dolphins? I mean, it sounds like a joke, right? But remember, through 9 games, the Packers have only given up 6 first quarter points. It's ridiculous. Now, the 72 Dolphins gave up a touchdown to Minnesota in Week 3. A lot of naysayers like to say the 72 Dolphins didn't play a difficult schedule. Well, they played the Vikings in Week 3. That touchdown was the first points that Miami gave up in the first quarter in 1972. The Jets scored a first quarter touchdown in Week 4, but that was a defensive touchdown. Doesn't count against the defense. The defense gave up a field goal in Week 5 against the Chargers, and Bob Greasy had his leg broken in that game and didn't come back to play quarterback until the playoffs. Through Week 9, the 72 Dolphins defense gave up 6 more points in a Week 8 game against Buffalo. So still the 2025 Packers, fewer points given up in the first quarter than even the 72 Dolphins. Now, when I interviewed Bob Greasy for the book The Game Before the Money, which is still available at major book retailers, he said he thought the 73 Dolphins were better. So let's check out that version of the no-name defense. And they gave up a field goal in Week 1 to San Francisco I'm getting all of this information from Pro Football Reference, by the way. I'm going through schedule by schedule. I need to mention that. Anyway, so field goal in week 1 against San Francisco, given up by the 73 Dolphins in the first quarter. Another field goal against the Raiders the next week. But the next points that defense gave up in the first quarter was a field goal against Buffalo in week 6. So that's 9 points in 6 weeks. That's really impressive. But the Packers, 2025 Packers, have already topped that. Okay? Miami also gave up a touchdown, the 73 Dolphins, in the first quarter against New England in week 7. So I'm still reeling about the stat with the 78 Steelers not giving up a single first quarter touchdown all season. If there is another modern era team, and when I say modern, let's talk Burt Bell era forward, okay, 1946 on. I would be, it is hard pressed to even think of that, but maybe there's another one coming up. Let's keep researching, because we got the 2000 Ravens. I know some of you are probably thinking, well, what about the Ravens? Yeah, so how did that famous defense do in the first quarter compared to this year's 2025 Packers so far? After shutting out the Steelers in week 1, the 2000 Ravens gave up 17 first quarter points to the Jaguars in week 2. I know, that's hard to believe. But if we take out that game, the Ravens gave up a field goal to Miami in week 3, a field goal to the Jaguars in week 6, and then no more first quarter points until a touchdown against the Browns in week 13. That's several weeks without giving any first quarter points. And now here's something interesting. The 2000 Ravens, after 9 games, were at about the same place record-wise as the Packers after week 9. They were 5-4. This year's Packers are 5-3-1. Okay, so, what's going to become of this Packer team? Are they going to end up like the Ravens? Or are they going to end up like the next team we're going to look into who didn't make the playoffs? The 1977 Atlanta Falcons. Oh, yeah. Grits Blitz. You didn't think I would forget the Grits Blitz, would you? No. The 77 Falcons finished 7-7 with former Packer Scott Hunter as their starting quarterback for much of the time, alternating with the young Steve Bartkowski. That defense had Hall of Famer Claude Humphrey on it. Now, that 77 Falcons, they gave up 6 first quarter points in week 1 against the Rams on a Harold Jackson touchdown reception from Joe Namath. There you go. How many of you remember Joe Namath on the Rams? I'm of the age where I can only remember Joe Namath with the Rams. I have one memory of Joe Namath playing, and that was Monday night game, Rams against Chicago. All right, so the Rams scored 6 first quarter points against the 77 Falcons. And the next first quarter points that the 77 Falcons gave up was a field goal to the Bears. And they won that game, and they were 5-2 after that. Then they gave up a touchdown to the Lions in the first quarter in week 9. Lions missed the extra point, and the Falcons scored 17 in the fourth quarter to win that game. So they were 5-4 after week 9. That's also very similar to where the Packers are. So, what way is this team going to go? I mean, that's what's great about looking at history. Okay, the 2000 Ravens, pretty much the same record. And the 77 Falcons, pretty much the same record. Okay, the Falcons ended up 7-7 and missed the playoffs. The Ravens went on to become one of the most recognized teams in NFL history in terms of defense. Okay, so I got a few more teams to look at. The Purple People Eaters. The 1969 Minnesota Vikings. You didn't think I'd forget about a team with Carl Eller on it, did you? Carl Eller, a great friend to the Game Before the Money over the years. You can read his oral history interview in the book The Game Before the Money and hear him on episode 84 of the Game Before the Money podcast. Big shout out to everybody that was at our book signing in downtown Minneapolis for the Game Before the Money, Carl Eller and myself together. So let's look at the 1969 Vikings. They gave up a field goal to the Giants in week 1. And the Giants quarterback at the time was, yes, Fran Tarkenton. I know some of you out there knew that. Now the next first quarter points that the Vikings gave up in 1969 was against the Cardinals in week 5. That was another field goal. So that's 6 points given up by that Vikings defense in the first quarter over the first 5 weeks of 1969. And then no more first quarter points for the rest of the regular season. So like the 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers, 0 first quarter touchdowns for the entire regular season. 6 total first quarter points. Minnesota was the NFL champions that year and eventually lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 4. All right, so there's only one team in football history to have shutout wins in 2 consecutive championship games. Philadelphia Eagles fans, I'm talking to you. The 1948 and 1949 Philadelphia Eagles. I looked up their first quarter point stats. And the 1948 Eagles only gave up 7 points through the first 10 games. And that was a touchdown in week 1 against the Chicago Cardinals. Now, if you're thinking that the NFL just rescheduled championship teams on the opening day of the season, that's just kind of a new thing they've come up with. Look, the 1947 NFL championship game was a great game between the Cardinals and Eagles, then the Chicago Cardinals. They rescheduled it for week 1 of 1948. So, that 1948 Eagles defense that went on to shut out the Cardinals in the 1948 NFL championship game, they only gave up 7 points in the first 10 weeks. Okay, we'll see how the Packers do this week if they can maintain that slim margin over that amazing Philadelphia Eagles defense. So we can't talk Packers defense without bringing up the Lombardi Packers, okay? And let's look at perhaps Vince Lombardi's greatest team, the 1962 Packers, okay? I can't believe I'm comparing the Lombardi Packers to the 2025 Packers. But this particular stat, the Packers in 2025, again, have only given up 6 total first quarter points through 9 games. Well, what about the 1962 Packers? They didn't give up any first half points in their first 3 games. 2 of them were shutouts. The first time a team scored in the first quarter against the Packers in 1962 was in week 6 when the 49ers kicked a field goal. The next first quarter points against the 62 Packers, that came in week 10 a field goal by the Colts. So the 62 Packers incredibly only gave up 3 first quarter points in their first 9 games. So comparing the 62 Packers, I can't believe I'm saying this, with the 2025 Packers in terms of first quarter points given up, the 62 Packers have a slight edge because they only gave up 3 points in their first 9 games. And this year's Packers has given up 6. The 62 Packers gave up a field goal in week 10 in the first quarter against the Colts. And then the week after that was the famous Thanksgiving Day game against the Lions. And the Packers gave up a touchdown in the first quarter in that game. And that was their only loss of the season for the 1962 Packers, was against the Lions on Thanksgiving Day. Green Bay went on to defeat the New York Giants in the 1962 NFL Championship game. Okay, so this 2025 Packers defensive stat of 6 first quarter points over the first 9 games with 0 touchdowns, that turns out to stand up pretty well against some of the greatest defenses of all time. Now, how is that going to translate throughout the rest of the season? Who knows? Maybe they'll give up 2 touchdowns against the Giants this week. You know, the Giants have a new head coach. Teams tend to do well in their first week with a new head coach, at least from what I tend to remember. Okay, at the beginning, I promised to tell you about what defense is likely the most incredible of all time in terms of fewest points allowed kind of stats. And I would say that's the undefeated 1929 Green Bay Packers. Now, don't let anybody tell you that the 72 Dolphins are the only undefeated champions in NFL history. The 1929 Packers were 12-0-1. And they didn't give up any first quarter points the entire season, all season long. The only opposition points in the first quarter against the 1929 Packers was a safety in week 3 against the Cardinals. The defense itself only gave up 9 points all season long. I know, it's totally different era, single wing, okay? But still, 9 points by that defense all season. Really impressive. There were 2 safeties scored against the Packers. So that's 4 points given up by the offense. I mean, that's almost half, right? That's almost half that the offense gave up. So I'm going to close this by looking at 2 other teams that went undefeated in the regular season. That's the 1942 Bears. Remember, I said I was going to talk about one more Bears team. 1942 Bears and the 2007 Patriots. The 1942 Chicago Bears gave up a touchdown to the Cardinals in the first quarter during week 3. And that 7 points was already more than the Packers have given up in the first quarter in 2025. That's how ridiculous of a stat this is for the Packers going into week 10. It's unbelievable. Okay, so the 2007 Patriots, the Bills scored a touchdown against them in week 3. Marshawn Lynch with the carry on that one. He started his career in Buffalo. So again, as crazy as this is, that's already more points given up by the eventual undefeated 2007 Patriots, undefeated in the regular season. That's already more points that team gave up in the first quarter than the Packers have given up this year in the first quarter going into week 10. Now, the next points that the Patriots gave up that year was a field goal in week 10 against the Colts. All right, so now you're totally filled in on this obscure but just amazing stat about the 2025 Green Bay Packers defense. I'm Michael Jackson. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Game Before the Money podcast. Thanks also to Bill and Debbie Butler for their generous donation to keep this podcast going. Bill Butler, former Green Bay Packer, former Dallas Cowboy, former Pittsburgh Steeler, and Minnesota Viking. Remember, the Game Before the Money is a 501c3 nonprofit. Please visit thegamebeforethemoney.com to read great football history articles or to donate. If you use any research from the book, podcast, website, please mention the Game Before the Money on your social media channel or your broadcast, or please feel free to give a donation. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I'm a one-man team. I don't know why I keep saying we, but I kind of feel like it's a collective. Transcriptions of some podcast episodes are available at thegamebeforethemoney.com and are powered by our transcription partner, Sonix. SONIX. Visit sonix.ai to learn more about their automated transcription services.